So good morning, everybody. My name is Sarah Pritchard. I'm the Executive Director of Rosie the Riveter Trust. We are a nonprofit and official partner of the national park that's located here in Richmond, California, near where I live. And that is the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park. Everyone put yourselves on mute except for Anne, who's speaking next.
Oh, I'm so glad to have this opportunity, folks. One of the things that we really want to concentrate on over the next few weeks, months, and we'll say hopefully in the next few years is how to make sure that the Rosie the Riveters who are with us today are known and that their communities come behind them and leave something permanent behind. So that's what we've been working on from Thanks Plain and Simple for the last 12 years. Different projects that most of you that know me have already been involved in other projects. We have 5 Rosies today, and we're going to be introduced. I will introduce each one and let them talk. The most important thing I think that that Sarah and I want to talk about or want you to come away with is that we are partnering with the Rosie the Riveter Trust on this in order to show that these different groups in America can pull together, and that we will, and that we can do it around different kinds of work. So we've got the Rosies here to tell their stories, but also don't forget that we have many, many projects. We've named the first government building in America, the Rosie the Riveter building. We've got many projects that people can do on a long-term basis and involve these Rosies in those decisions on how to make that happen.
Yes, it's a pleasure. I just do want to say it's been a pleasure to get to know Anne and a number of her board members. And we are so excited that this is our first partnering event, if you will, on Zoom. So please, thank you for your patience as we figure this out. I don't think Anne or I are big techies. To you, Anne.
Thank you, Sarah. I think the most important piece of this is that each of the Rosies has a very, very different story. And I want to introduce Ruth Edwards first, because I think it's important that people realize that even after the war, the women had very serious responsibilities. And some of those women took care of injured men. Ruth Edwards and Buddie Curnutte are 2. So let's start with you, Ruth, and just tell us your general story in a few minutes here.
I graduated from Hamlin High School in 1941, and I always said if I had any claim to fame, it would be the fact that I graduated with retired Brigadier General Chuck Yeager, who just recently passed away. And after graduation, no one went on to college because the war was happening. So I went to work at Carnegie, Illinois Steel, which was located in the U.S. Naval Ordnance Plant in South Charleston. And I was an expediter, which meant that I went from one machine to another, checking to see that everyone was on at the job, had the materials that they needed and everything. And if they didn't, I had to report it back to the office and be sure and get them the right materials that they needed. So I learned to use the drill press, and I was allowed to use it some, which I really appreciated. The machine shop was filled with all kinds of machines, drill presses, milling machines, and all different kinds. And it was impressive for me to know that when we did the Today Show, it was done right in the unit that I worked in. Carnegie, when the war was over, just immediately moved back to Pennsylvania. So I was considered a runner. I said if we had Fitbits back then, I know I would have gotten my 10,000 steps in every session. But we worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and most of us packed our lunches. There were women there from all over the state, and they had to wear slacks, which some of them had never done before. And there was no absenteeism. Everybody was always on time, a lot of patriotism. We all worked because we wanted to end the war. We did work together, we pulled together, and we eventually got the job done. Most of us had brothers, brothers, or husbands or fathers in the war, and I happened to have a young man that I had graduated from high school with. We dated all during high school, and he was in the Philippines at the time the bomb was dropped. So he was captured and served on the Bataan Death March and was a prisoner of war for 42 months in Japan prison camps. So when he came home, his health was bad, and I had to take care of him. But at the time he was in service, he got down to 74 pounds, so he was put in the death house. And that's where they put you when you were expected to die. You weren't expected to come home. And he had a friend that saw him and asked the Japanese guard to let him take care of him. So he sneaked him in some little extra portions of rice, and he did survive. He came home, and after he came home, I went back to college, which none of us did right after high school because of the war situation. So I went back to college and got my degree, and I taught school for a while, and then I worked at the State Department of Education as state supervisor, and that's where I retired from. But my husband's health was never good, so I took care of him, and I lost him in 1997. But my experience in the defense plant was very, very interesting. I especially enjoyed the heating unit, because they had those huge cranes that carried the big pieces of steel, and it heated them in the furnaces, and then dipped them in a solution that cooled them real quick to make the steel hard. But the whole experience was wonderful. I mean, it was exciting, and we got to end the war. We helped end the war. We felt patriotic, and there was no absenteeism, and it was just a good experience. I'm glad to be a Rosie.
And we love you so much, Ruth. I will say Ruth was 98 in October. And maybe we should move on to you, Mozelle, because you're the senior here today, aren't you? Mozelle is now 100 years old. Mozelle worked in Akron, Ohio by essentially learning to rivet what was called the F4U, or the Corsair airplane, and she still has her manual with all of her math calculations, and she gave it to me, let me see it one time when we had the wing of a Corsair airplane brought here that was signed by the Rosies, and she said, I'm afraid to show it to you because I'm afraid somebody might find a math mistake. But Mozelle, can you tell us in about 5 minutes your story?
Am I on now?
You are on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, well, yes, I went to work. I was working in a little coal mining camp at a soda fountain when someone told me I could stay with them in Ohio till I got a job, and they'd help me get started. So I, with $35 in my pocket, I got on the train and started to Ohio to work. And I worked there in the aircraft for where they made the Corsairs. But when we started in, we had to have training, and we had to train with swept the rivets up off of the floor and put them on a table. All different kinds of rivets were mixed together. So we had to go through those rivets and pick out the sizes. And of course, there was a lot of dirt from the floor on them too, because that was a dirty job. But those, they'd have like little boards around the side so the rivets couldn't roll off. And we worked there, and the metal that we worked with was the scraps from the planes. They were 4 plants there in Ohio, and they made a different plane in each plant. And we had to use the scraps that they used from the planes to do our metal work with. We had to learn to cut it and measure it, and measure our rivets and make sure we got the right size and everything. They had a tool shed there in the plant where we would go and check out tools that we were going to work with that day. And planes would come down on the assembly line, and when it came down to our station, we got on it like ants on a piece of sugar. And we got our part of it done before it went on into the next station. And we worked there, I worked there for, I think, I left a little bit before the war was over because I was having some health problems. But I enjoyed the time that I was working there. We worked 5 and 6 days a week, and I never missed very much. They gave me a card saying that I hadn't missed a day in 6 months, and I still have my manual, and still have some little memento things that I got from that time, and I'm very proud of them. And this year on my 100th birthday, they had a drive-by, and there were quite a few cars in the drive-by. And of course, I was out on the porch, and in the parade that went by, one of my friends had her grandchildren there on a pony. And when it was over, they said, "We want your picture on that pony." So I put my foot in the stirrup and got on the pony to have a picture made for on my 100th birthday. One of my nephews in Virginia wanted to know if that pony's name was Macaroni. Said he thought I was Yankee Doodle. They all got a big kick out of me on the pony on my 100th birthday. But I appreciate all that they did. I'm a widow. My husband died in 1987, and I moved to Summersville, West Virginia. He was a coal miner, and we moved from place to place to keep with the coal mines. And after he passed away, I had a house built and moved to Summersville, West Virginia. So I've been here since 87. He died in 85, and I came here in 87. So I enjoyed my time that I worked there because I was a little country girl that grew up out in the country. There were 10 of us in the family, and I was the youngest. So I had 9 other people bossing me around. I didn't know which way to go and what to do half the time, but I enjoyed the time I had with them.
And one wonderful thing about Mozelle is how much she's loved by her family. Many Rosies we find are really loved by their families. And I always feel that one of the reasons that the Rosies that we have with us today are still with us is because they really are cared for. And I think that's a lesson for society. But you have a wonderful family, and most of the Rosies do have great families. So thank you, Mozelle.
Yeah.
Let me introduce Buddie. Buddie Curnutte was born in Appalachia, and most people think that's West Virginia or maybe Kentucky, but it's this was New York in the Buffalo area. She had she did not have a mother from childhood, and she and her brother learned to pretty much take care of themselves while their father worked on the railroad. When she went to work at Curtiss Wright Airplane Factory, she'll tell you about that, but they had a lot of crashes on their airplanes there at Curtiss Wright, and the women really worried that it was their fault. She can talk about that. But the really important thing to me is that she decided she wanted to essentially see the world, so she joined the Coast Guard. And of course, they sent her to Philadelphia, right? She wanted to see the West Coast. And then she married a man who is a very exceptional person and had some pretty serious disabilities. And he is not only remembered here in this community, but he has a bridge named for him. So, Buddie, ready?
Yes, ma'am. I think you sort of beat me to it all.
Did I?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
No.
Go ahead. I just lived in Buffalo, New York area, and during the war, they had it in the newspaper. They needed ladies to work in the plants because all the boys had gone in service. So I went and applied. They said, well, you have to learn a trade before we can hire you. So they sent me to this school to teach me how to use a drill and a riveting gun. That took about 4 or 5 weeks, and then they hired me. They took me out to the Curtiss Wright Airplane Factory, just outside of Buffalo. They took you to your station. You were not allowed to go around the plant. You were to report to that one place, no place else. I riveted P-40 Warhawk plane wings. We did it in 3 shifts. You'd see the lady coming behind you with a red crayon. Every rivet that did not lay flat was marked. You had to drill it out and not make the hole larger. You had the rivet had to be completely set, because if the wind worked on it, it would weaken. And one little weakened place makes another. We were told to tie our hair back, because when you use a drill, if your hair falls forward, out comes your hair because the drill is strong. A few girls found that out to be true. They wanted to look pretty and lost some hair. Most of us listened to what we were told to do. Some didn't. Therefore, we lost a lot of girls because they just could not stay in their area. They always wanted to go outside and smoke. Things like that in plants, there's no time for it. The war was on. We had to get the work out. I enjoyed being with all the girls. I now wish I'd have got to know more of them. But when you went there to work. You didn't go there to talk. And so I decided I was going to travel. So I joined the Coast Guard, went through boot camp in January. Every time they'd call to the rear march, I'd be on a piece of ice and down I'd go. They pulled fire drills. When you were in the shower, you were allowed to put your coat and shoes on. That was all. We were right there in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, very cold. We had 6 weeks of training, and I trained to be a medic. And a lot, when we got graduation day came up, they said, write down where you would like to be stationed. I wrote down the West. I got Philadelphia. I think my government lost the map. But there was a large naval hospital there in Philadelphia, and all the boys that lived in the area was sent to that hospital after they were injured. We went out there, a couple of us girls went out there to see how the blind walked around and how they worked. Well, they said they used their hearing to walk around. They did better than we did. I got into the orthopedic department and I met a young man from Cabin Creek. His name was Buddie Curnutte. He had one leg off and part of a foot. And he still had not received a leg, but we got to know each other, and I would take him out in the wheelchair, push him around the grounds. And one day I went in there dressed in civilian clothes. He says, what are you doing? I says, I'm going home. He wanted my address, so we wrote. He came to New York and got me in July of 1947. Brought me to West Virginia. We went, got a phone book. We called Reverend Ashworth in Canoa City. He said to come at 8:45, so we did. We pulled up, it was a funeral home. Well, we went in, we got married, and it lasted 60 years. Earl had many seizures, a lot of trouble with his legs, but he became an ordained minister. The seizure stopped. There is a bridge in St. Albans named for him. And when he passed away in 2008, I joined the Rosies. And it's been wonderful. Anne took us places that I'd never been before. We spoke to children. We loved children. There was a little boy at the Capitol come up to me when we were there once. And he says, "Can I shake your hand?" I said, "Yes." We shook hands and he looked at his hand. He said, "I touched history." It was wonderful to hear that. And a lady came, she says, "Can I give you a hug?" I said, "Sure." She says, "You got me out of the kitchen." So see, we did do something. They didn't think women were able to do the work of men, but looks like we did a pretty good job. Thanks, Rosies. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you. I'm crying, so I'm sorry for that. But it really is very special, folks. We've got to make sure that these women are known and that their own work and their own wishes come to truth. Most of all, if we can show that the women have made wonderful decisions, like Buddie has been part of so many decisions that we made. She's in her documentary film. There's just so much that she has done. Look at our website, thanksplainandsimple.org, and just about every project on there, Buddie has helped us to establish. And then we started then to look for places around the country and around the world. And now we are counting Philadelphia as a model Rosie the Riveter major city. And I think that's a good introduction to you, June. I don't think I can introduce you any better than you can introduce yourself. June and I met, I'm not sure the year, something like 2013 maybe. And when I was giving a talk in upstate New York somewhere, no, I was in Pennsylvania. And immediately we saw how she captures an audience. She is a trained professional clown. She grew up in Philadelphia. Her mother was a Rosie, and she has a really very good way of pulling people into this program, the American Rosie Movement. Can you hear us now, June?
I can hear you loud and clear now. Thank you so much.
Very good.
I have to start. I was 17. I was in high school, and the boys were leaving to go to war. My boyfriend was going to another high school, and he was dying to get into, oh, I shouldn't use that term, dying. He wanted to join the armed forces to help our country. And my parents were going through a divorce. Everything hit at one time. The war, my parents' divorce, mother and I moved down to South Philadelphia and slept in a twin bed together while she went to work at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. She was on the aircraft side, working with punch press, drill presses. She worked inside the airplanes. She never said what she was doing, but I really felt I had to do something for the war effort. I talked to my high school, well, maybe next year you could do something, but I wouldn't have any of that. I was in high school accounts teacher, and he suggested that perhaps I could join the drafting club. And I would, of course, be the only girl there, but that didn't make any difference to me. So I approached Mr. Hall, the drafting teacher, and convinced that I was deadly serious. There goes that word deadly again. But I was really serious about wanting to learn drafting. Well, they gave me a course. I skipped at least four classes. And this wonderful teacher taught me every day, 4 classes every day, until my teacher thought that I was ready to go out and work. He sent a letter to the Philadelphia Navy Yard. He called them and told them he was sending his best pupil. And much to my shock, surprise, and thrill, they took me. They trained me. They took me to various courses. They took a whole group of us women together and taught us welding. And we actually did the welding, riveting, electrical work, machine work, woodwork, and then they put us on the floor. I was with a wonderful group of women, at least 10 women in that drafting department. Our job at that particular time was the transformation of a cargo ship to a troop carrier. And these women were just amazing and wonderful. We really bonded. Not only did we play softball together after work, but we went bowling and had a little incident to show you how wonderful these women were. One of the women came over to me one day and said, there was an article in the newspaper that a plane had crashed on my boyfriend's base. He was in the Navy Air Corps at that time. And I hadn't heard of him for several weeks. So I was really very, very worried. Well, these women took me after work to a church at 13th Street between Market and Chestnut in Philadelphia. Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, and whatever we were, everybody lit candles for the safety of the young men who were in the service. And we all said prayers. I was so thrilled and so happy and so honored that these women were so wonderful to me. And yes, because I was the youngest one on the floor, they took very good care of me. They were mother hens. They made sure that the wolves that I worked with didn't bother me. There was so much to do at the Navy Yard during that period of time. We had the privilege of seeing the president, who looked absolutely dreadful. He came in an open car, wrapped up in a robe and a shawl. We had USO shows there. And while I was working at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, I signed up to be a junior hostess at the USO. And they let me work there for several terms. And they knew that I wasn't trying to get a date out of any of the boys. I learned the jitterbug, and I had a lot of fun with some of the young men. I did not win the last jitterbug session. Somebody else did. And we had an accident on the floor. There's a step that you take where the young man kicks over your head and you drop to the floor. Well, he had an accident. He dropped to the floor right on top of me. It was a lot of fun, a lot of embarrassment, but it was something that we all enjoyed. When we would take the young men to the movies, and there was a newsreel that came on. The young man sitting next to me fell to the floor when they started shooting on the newsreel, and everybody reached over to pat him and hug him and reassure him that he was fine.
June, I'm going to interrupt you here. Do you know that Barry Vogel from the Netherlands has just written a note to me, or to us, to thank you for your donation to the museum of your drafting materials. Why don't you tell about that?
Oh, through Anne, we had the pleasure of going to the Netherlands twice. Once to tell them who we were as Rosies, and that time I brought my drafting equipment with me. And what wonderful, wonderful people, what a wonderful, amazing people they are. They welcomed us heartily, warmly, and we planted a dogwood tree there while we were there. And we had the honor of meeting such wonderful people. We went back the second time to open the exhibit of Rosie the Riveter. And I had the pleasure of seeing my equipment in a case. We were interviewed on television, radio, you name it. We were just so honored to be there. Such a wonderful, wonderful country with such amazing, wonderful people. And recently, we were invited to the Netherlands Embassy to open the marker for the tree that we had planted. And that was another.
With the King and Queen, you were with Mozelle and 2 other Rosies to meet with the King and Queen of the Netherlands, which was quite an honor.
Oh.
But I can't stress enough how world class the Netherlands, the Dutch people have been.
What do they call it? Oh my goodness, the words are failing me. It's unusual for me not to remember I was going to say next. Yes. Start up again. Yeah. When the King and the Queen of the Netherlands invited us to see the, oh dear, Anne, help me. Anne?
Yes.
Are you muted?
Oh, help. I'm sorry. I'm reading a note. I'm sorry. I'm reading a note that somebody wants to know the connection between the Netherlands and the Rosies. So, of course, that is because the Netherlands essentially was occupied through the war. And at the end of the war, one of the very special things that happened with the help of the Netherlands is we got to go, Netherlands people, we got to go to the Netherlands to celebrate Victory Europe Day in America, dropping food on to the people of the Netherlands. They were dying, 2,000 people a day were dying. So that's a story that needs to be told. June, let's move on, but tell just a bit about the mural that you made in Philadelphia.
They wanted us there because we Rosies built the planes and provided the food and anything else that they needed. That when the planes flew over where that museum was, we dropped the parachutes dropped all the food and the clothing and the medication and anything else that they needed. And we were the ones that provided it for our men to drop in on the Netherlands. I think that's why we were invited, as a thanks to us. We really needed to thank them for what they did during World War II. What wonderful, brave people they were, and still are. Thousands and thousands of them worked in the industries. The Philadelphia Navy Yard, Bud's Shipyard, Westinghouse, Boeing, International Ladies Garment Workers Union. The men and women made clothing for the service people. But it was Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. Thousands of men, mostly women, came to work because the men were going to the service. And one more thing before Rose gets on. I'm working on something very important for the city of Philadelphia, and that is a mural that would depict Rosies from all walks of life and what we did during World War II. We've got the building all set. We've got some funding set up, and I'm trying to get other companies to join us. And boy, am I losing my voice.
And if you will look at the website, thanksplainandsimple.org, and look under projects, we have done 18 projects by 2014, but we actually got into doing more projects than we've actually put on our website. But the important thing here is that our whole effort, our whole goal is to get people involved. So we think that the best way to be involved is not just to, write letters or whatever, that's important, but to actually do the interviews and leave something permanent behind, such as the planting of the dogwood trees and the mural and that sort of thing that June is talking about now.
I think that, Anne, now is a great time to do a little bit of a Q&A. Does anyone have a question? Yes, Lisa.
For who?
Hi, I teach welding at a community college in Hayward, California, close to the Kaiser shipyards. And I would love to know what the Rosies might say to people who would not want women working with them, or to the parents of girls who want to do this kind of work, and what you found fulfilling about it.
I don't think we have a welder on the line, but Buddie, why don't you feel that? Do you think that did people talk down to you when you were a riveter? What would you say to somebody a young woman who might consider being a welder? Ruth, can you answer that?
I don't see anything wrong with it. I think it would be a good profession. There's nothing wrong with that type of work for a woman. I taught in a technical college in Charleston for a while, and we didn't have any problems with that.
And if we could just move on, there's another question in the chat box, and it says, were Rosies angry when they had to give up their jobs? I think that's a very interesting question. If any of the Rosies, if you want to unmute yourself. Okay, you just unmute yourself. Go ahead, June.
Can you hear Buddie now?
Buddie, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You're beautiful. Listen, what's been asked is, were you angry when you had to give up your job?
No, wanted to go home.
Rose, a very special Rosie. She, her parents came from Armenia, and her mother was escaped the Armenian genocide, and she moved from different places. And she worked at Westinghouse. Why don't you tell about your work at Westinghouse, Rose?
All right, that's fine. I lived in West Philadelphia, and I was 17 or 18 when I graduated from high school in 1942. I graduated from West Philadelphia High School.
Mhm.
And at that time, of course, I was going to go to college to be a teacher, but at the same time, there were all these ads looking for applicants for the defense factory, the Westinghouse Defense Factory in Essington. So I applied for it, and I was hired. I went in, and they taught me the how to read a blueprint, very light section. I went down into the shop. Now the shop had all kinds of machines, lathes, grinders, drill presses, everything. They put me on the grinder. I worked on the grinder, and I was, of course, single at the time. And I thought after this, then I'll go to college and so forth and so on. So as it happened, I think I stayed there until the end of the war. At the end of the war, they let all of us go. We were all laid off. Nobody resented it. We didn't mind it. In fact, it was pretty good. It was a short period of time, and I met people and I learned a lot. I learned a lot of mechanics and things that I had never expected to. And I left. I met my husband a year or so later, 1947. I met my husband, who had been a paratrooper, and he had just come back from the service. We got married, had children, and had a wonderful life. Now I'm 95, going on 96. I'm staying at the Wellington Retirement Home, which is in Westchester, Pennsylvania. And I'm waiting for, I guess, for God. Thing to say. Is there any questions you want to ask me?
If there's questions, then we can just you need to unmute yourself.
What were you grinding?
Oh, I was on the grinder on the grinder. It's called a grinder. We would grind down small pieces of metal according to the size that's required on that metal. We would have a box full of it. We would do that. And then continue on. But actually, there were parts for machinery for the US on their machinery that they used. I don't know. Okay.
Thank you, Rose.
Everyone, we are at the top of the hour almost, and I know that there are questions, and I know that we are actually having technical difficulties figuring out this Q&A. And so what I think, Anne, we should do is we should wrap this meeting up, and then I want to say, please send any questions that you have to Anne or myself, and we'd be happy to talk with the Rosies and then get back to you and figure out a way to have your questions answered. It has been a sincere pleasure for me. I know Anne knows the Rosies very well, but for myself, and I can imagine a number of my colleagues, board members and committee members and volunteers are on the line today with me here in California. And I know it's quite a treat to meet some new Rosies. We really appreciate it. And I wanted you to know that the park, the national park, has what we call our Rosie docents. They are Rosie ambassadors, about 6 women. And for years, they've been coming to our visitor education center. And we actually have what we call our Rosie Wrangler on the line here, Tammy. Maybe you can wave your hand. Tammy helps coordinate all of their coming to the visitor center when it's open, not during the pandemic. And for the Rosies to tell their story and to travel. They've gone to the White House, they've gone to France. And I think that there is a lot of similar work that we are doing between the Rosie the Riveter Trust and Thanks, plain and simple. But maybe we can have our Rosies on the line for another event in the near future. Anne, thank you so much. It's wonderful to collaborate with you. Do you have any closing words?
Nothing more than thanks, plain and simple. Thanks.
Everyone have a wonderful day. Wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.